we have seen the growth of forces that don't care about poverty.
Poverty, I think society, in the Western society, is seen as something, if you are poor, is also a bit your fault.
If you look at some areas of Europe, the level of youth unemployment is like 3%, while in other parts it's 25%. This is what you were referring to, but there are places where it's 50%.
Is the education system in Europe failing to prepare people for a job market?
While we record this conversation, we have seen the meteoric rise in the US of the New York Mayor Mamdani. There are political forces that base their electoral support by deceiving people.
This is Moving Europe podcast, where we bring to you a European perspective on topics that matter.
And if you like our content, then please don't forget to like and subscribe.
In the EU, 1 out of 5 people is at risk of poverty or social exclusion. Under 18-year-old, this is a figure of 1 out of 4, so even worse. Today we'll talk about these topics with our guest, Brando Benifei. Thanks a lot,
Thank you very much
for being here. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate it, and we think it's a topic which is really not appreciated enough, because I think we all think that in the EU it's a welfare state, it's a welfare economy. But in light of that, how can we explain those figures that still poverty is such an important topic?
Well, I think we have an issue of lack of attention on the problem. In fact, if I may say, if we look at poverty, we see that we have a lot of children that are poor in Europe, even in rich countries of Europe, the richest countries in Europe. And this gives you the understanding of what is the reality. The reality is that poverty is not at the top of the policy agenda, and there is the cultural acceptance of a acceptable level of poverty, which is something that I think is absurd. We should say that no level of poverty is acceptable. And I've been myself working on the topic, for example, when I was the negotiator of the European Social Fund Plus, where we had to fight during the period of the COVID. That was when this European fund was negotiated for this period. We had to be confronted with the fact that there were necessities to support the economy, the relocation of workers, and so we were told maybe the extreme poverty should be not so much important as much as keeping the people that are working today still at work. In fact, this contraposition was absurd, because if we have too many poor people and we don't care about them, they will become a social cost. Even if we don't care about them, I hope people care about them, but they will become an issue for society in any case. Ending up in crime networks, ending up with health problems, ending up in creating social distress at a broader level. So investing in eliminating poverty as much as possible and dealing with child poverty, as we try to do with the social fund in the end, with the child guarantee, bringing money that is specifically allocated to fight child poverty. This is something that we try to do, but we have seen that there was a cultural backlash on this. Not so many people, not so many governments really cared about fighting poverty as a priority.
Do you think that this is also a cultural issue? Because also if we look at inequality, I think it goes a bit hand in hand with what you said on poverty, that nowadays the richest 10% in the European Union has around 57% of the wealth, while the bottom 50%, so 1 European out of 2, has less than 5%. And this figure increased since the 1990s. So do you think it's also a kind of cultural neoliberal issue, this?
Yeah, well, it's also a cultural issue in a broader sense, as you try to say, because I think that it's a fact that we see the inequalities growing and not so much protest against that. In fact, it's not at the center of the attention of most people that the first priority should be overcoming the level of inequality. So in fact, as a politician, I have to say that I find it effective in this context to connect in a close way, in a clear way, the actions to reduce inequality with concrete achievements in terms of services, in terms of money transfer, or of access to education or transport. In fact, while we record this conversation, we have seen the meteoric rise in the US of the New York Mayor Mamdani, who I think was very interesting in this perspective, because he was never ideological on the need to tax the rich more, but always linking the need to rebalance the fiscal collection, so acting on the billionaires in a very clear linked way with the result to obtain for his campaign in terms of free buses, free childcare, etc. I think this is more effective in a context where culturally there is not so much attention to inequality per se by the majority of people.
Yeah, also because he proposed this wealth tax indeed to fund the public services, and it's something that, for example, in the previous US election the Democrats proposed but did not work so much, and it's curious that it's in the city with the most billionaires in the world, or one of the cities with the most billionaires. So what does it say about the Western society, in your opinion, this? That they elected this mayor?
I think the fact that Mamdani managed to bring this message through, it's because, in my opinion, he was able to not simply advocate for a abstract social justice that personally I find absolutely appealing as a concept, but I'm not sure this is resonating with most people that are far away from political discourse, far away from political activism. They want to understand what is there for them in this social justice discourse, and they want clarity. And I think Mamdani was extremely clear on what was at stake by getting a new revenue coming from a tax on billionaires.
And I think it's curious because, at least in my personal feeling about the political situation in Europe, I have the impression that this topic of wealth taxes was a bit bigger maybe 7-8 years ago, maybe also inspired to Piketty and all this also literature behind it. Then it got a bit lost, and now it's mainly talking points about competitiveness and so on. So what happened, and how would you deal with this now?
In my opinion, it's simply the fact that the abstract appeal to tax more the wealthiest is less popular today than saying tax less the least wealthy. And this should be a matter of reflection. You see that in polls, people prefer the messaging around reducing the taxes for them that are low earners than wanting the higher earners to pay more. Why? Because they are not sure what comes for them in taxing the high earners, because there is distrust in the public institutions. There is the idea that the extra money might end up in fact enriching another elite of people and not getting to them. So I think that having a clear message on affordability, on reducing poverty by acting on accessibility to services, and by getting more money in the pockets of people, which sounds less intellectually refined, however, seems to me more effective. And I think that Mamdani campaign, which is very specific, it's in New York, where the Democrats already won every time, at least in the political vote. So it's not applicable per se everywhere, but the thing that I think brings to this conversation about inequality and poverty is that the concreteness and the clear reference to real life situations of his campaigning was extremely effective.
And I think this is also a topic which for you has accompanied your political career for a long time. So a curiosity for us personally, how did you personally become involved in this topic in particular? Was there any moment which drove you in this direction?
I have to say I went into this topic from a political activist perspective. In fact, I've been even recently campaigned for the European Citizens Initiative on taxing the ultra-rich. And that didn't have a big success, to be frank. And it didn't show the number of signatures that you see were reached with other initiatives. For example, on the animal welfare or on protecting abortion rights, just to give a few examples. Because I can say, in fact, that I come from a way of being active on the topic that I understand probably is not so much effective. I think that being more active, like I've done working on the social fund, on concrete programs for lifting people out of poverty, for example, in this case of the child guarantee, guaranteeing access to food at school for children, decent housing, access to education, were more useful. And in general, the message needs to be simple and clear and attached to the living conditions of people. And so I even make a bit of self-criticism looking at how I approach the topic in certain instances, because I think that people today want us to be clear on the principles, obviously, but also clear on how we would do things that would transform reality concretely. So in the case of the child guarantee, we advocated then for enlarged funding coming also from a wealth tax. But I think it's important that we keep the focus on giving the people a clear understanding of what we are proposing that can change their life and how.
Yeah, because I think European citizens, they lost a bit this belief in the institutions to change their life, because if you look at the turnout in 79 was more than 60%, now it's 50. So your response is to be more concrete. I would say, like to say what can change their life on a daily basis.
Which doesn't mean more moderate. It means more clear on the impact on real life, which is can be applicable, Mamdani has shown it, also to a socialist agenda, not necessarily to a centrist or moderate one.
And for you, the strongest point of your agenda in this sense?
Well, if I connect with my work on poverty and on inequality, thinking of my work on AI, because I've been the rapporteur of the AI Act, today it feels for me crucial, and I try to say this in every occasion that I have where I have to speak and discuss these issues, that AI can be a factor of extreme increase of inequalities, but can also be at the same time a factor of enabling, of creating more productivity that can be distributed in terms of added value, in terms of revenue, in terms of distribution of working time. And so I think that this is something where democratization of technology and subtracting the use of AI from the objective of enriching only a small number of people at the spite of the others is something where I see the frontier today of the equality fight, which entails not only European policies but also even more national welfare, labor, fiscal policies that are very much now still a national competence.
Yeah, because in the end, the AI will be a new industrial revolution. I was just reading today that in the US, they cut in the recent months more than 120,000 jobs just in the digital sector. So the replacement of jobs, and what is new is that is the first time they are also being replaced jobs that are like the so-called white-collar jobs that are not just labor-intensive jobs, but also jobs that require certain skills that now are not anymore updated. So do you see the future of the European Union and of young people with this AI revolution? Like it's more of hope or more of will change for the worse?
So we see different attitudes. In fact, I can identify two ways of doing that I think are both wrong. One is the extreme enthusiasm for AI that is without any kind of reflection on the implications for discriminations, for inequality, for risks to health, safety, etc. And on the other end, the anti-scientific fear that is not based on concrete risks and concrete issues that needs to be dealt with, but on a generic, abstract fear for new technologies. Also, I do not, and it's a bit of a spin-off of this last approach, I do not think it's very effective to consider these new technologies in a way that they can be avoided and that you can imagine the workplace or the social state to stay as if there was no AI revolution and like trying to stop it. I don't think this is really realistic. It needs to be governed as we tried to govern with policies in the past, other technological changes and revolutions.
If you look at the landscape and the political landscape in Europe right now, the political forces for which poverty, inequalities are a priority vis-a-vis those which are not prioritizing it. What's your view about this distribution of political force, and how do you think it will develop in the next years, next decades?
Well, in my opinion, we have seen the growth of forces that don't care about poverty, because also of the lack of participation of the poor people that could benefit from better policies. In fact, the representation is also being shifted away from the poorer sectors of society. And so, in fact, the political forces today in Europe have a tilt that moves closer to those that don't care about fighting poverty. They think is something that is like a natural phenomenon that should be like treated only in an emergential and marginal way, not in a structural and systemic way. So at the moment the situation is quite bleak. I think we need to change course and win elections and change the direction. At the moment I see, unfortunately, the prevalence of other political tendencies.
But I think it's also incredibly difficult to change people's minds in this way, right? Because from a communication perspective, to say you should care, it's very difficult, right? Because then people will say, I have other priorities or whatever. So probably it's much more effective to bring these realities closer to people, to raise awareness for them. And so I'm wondering, from a communication perspective, what do you think is the most effective to bring this closer to the political reality?
Well, I think that people try to forget that there are large amounts of poor people that are still in our society below the level of poverty in terms of earnings. And I think you need people to see that, to understand that more clearly. They feel that it's something that is very far away, but it's not true. There are a lot of children that are living in poverty. I think that people should see it, should be able to understand that it's the reality around them. And it's not only people that they feel are far from them culturally, because sometimes they try to imagine that the only poor children are coming from foreigners, but it's not true. So I think it's important to try to overcome these prejudices of a less poverty than the reality tells us when we look at data and we look at the reality. I think most people think we are less poor in terms of income distribution than we are.
Yeah. And here I think it's also very interesting because, like, poverty, I think society, in the Western society, is seen as something, if you are poor, is also a bit your fault, no? Like, and it's also like it's not very well seen that we don't start equal, you know? Like, you can have parents that are more well-being, you have parents that maybe don't have the money to give you good education and so on. So do you think on this aspect the left has been able to communicate it effectively, that we are not starting from the same point. Because I think what is seen is that poverty is something that is on your responsibility.
I think we have this issue of poor being a guilt. But I think we should and we could communicate better on this and create a different narrative. But it's not easy because you need to also take into account power structures around this. We also have a lot of people that don't want poverty to be tackled, because this would mean diverting also some resources from other objectives. So it's a matter of building a different narrative and also empowering the people that could advocate more for the subject.
Why is it so difficult for young people to find a job?
Well, it depends on where you live. In fact, we have a lot of inequalities in this also between different territories in Europe. If you look at some areas of Europe, the level of youth unemployment is like 3%, while in other parts it's 25%. This is what you were referring to, but there are places where it's 50%. So it's a very fragmented situation. Cohesion policy on this aspect has failed, we have to say. Things have become better in some areas, but they didn't bring a full convergence. I think that today we really need to invest more resources on supporting transition from education to work of young people, because also we have a lot of jobs opportunities that exist that do not find the person that is fine to fill them. And I'm not talking about low level, low dignity, low quality job positions. I'm talking about any kind of jobs. And we see them being offered, but not finding the people that have the right qualification or specific preparation to do them. That's only one aspect of the problem, obviously. But this is one, for example, that should be tackled more effectively.
Because in Italy, for example, the skills mismatch, I think, is quite a reality. In Italy is one of the countries that are struggling the most with youth unemployment. So we are in Brussels. And the left, like your party, your Democratic Party in Italy, like concretely what has done more? For example, so one concrete thing that you have done on skills mismatch?
Well, we have been working, and in fact some amelioration has happened in Europe, in Italy, but we need to do more on the functioning of employment centers in the public context that were reformed, and now, at least in some parts of the country, they work much better after a long time where they've been completely useless in helping young people finding jobs. I know that because I followed, especially in my first mandate from 2014 to 2019, the topic quite closely, having worked on the Youth Guarantee program. So I've seen this effort that has changed for the better some of the functioning, but we are still far away from an ideal situation. And also, I think that the work we have done as party in fighting and so acting at regional level and also with guidelines at national level, then we would need to do more, but in the end we didn't have all the time to do that in government, unfortunately, which is the issue of the internships. So at regional level and with the national guidelines, we have fought abuse of fake internships and unpaid internships. They still are there. We still have problems with that, but things have moved a little bit in the right direction thanks to our work, and this is a big fight we are continuing also here.
And here a question on the youth guarantee, because you mentioned it. We read it was quite successful with about 57 million people, like to some degree, benefiting from its services. So I was wondering, how does it work concretely? So if there's a young person looking for job or internship, how can this person get help from the youth guarantee?
Well, the Youth Guarantee has developed in various forms through projects for training in work of young people with cooperation between public employment services and businesses. This was a very successful way of using the youth guarantee, so sustaining the hiring of young people that would be trained with the support also of training money from the European Union in the job, and this has led to a high retaining of young people being hired this way, staying at work. But also it has been used, and this has more a mixed result in terms of different places has worked differently, for orientation, for supporting further training in a more traditional way, and supporting exchanges of young people with realities outside of the European of the member states they are from, to acquire more skills. So it's a set of initiatives, in fact, to increase the employability of young people, and it worked to some extent, and especially when we revised the program, I worked on that in my first mandate, we strengthened the outreach work, because we have found that many people that accessed Youth Guarantee were people that were already connected to other projects, to some strong social network, while the less connected people that would mostly benefit from European projects were unable to be reached. So that was very important.
And you mentioned the importance of the employability of these young people. And we read that in Europe, around 40% of employers say that they don't find the people with the necessary skills. And at the same time, a lot of people are unemployed. So it seems like a huge gap and mismatch between these two realities. So is the education system in Europe failing to prepare people for a job market?
I think what is failing is the connection between the end of the education and entering the job market. There is not enough support, orientation for all, not just through European projects, but for everyone to be able to have career support to enter the job market after studying, but also orientation for further studying after high school, and link that to the idea of a job career. I think this is something that needs to be strengthened, that is done well in some member states. You can see from the Nordics or the Germany, but other member states have failed.
But so it's really a question of more network rather than more skills, in your view?
Well, unfortunately, this is also a factor that impacts having a stronger initial network to enter in a better way the job market. But that's exactly why we need more generalized support that is not based on your family or your territorial background, but rather by a universal right to be supported in the transition from studying to work.
Yeah. And I think like losing a job or not having a job, it does not just impact your income, but also, for example, your mental health condition. Also, you mentioned situation of isolation, and among young people, again, like 1 out of 5 has mental health problems that can be anxiety or depression, for example. Do you think in this regard European politics in general is giving enough attention to mental health, to the mental health issue and crisis, also the loneliness crisis that we are having?
Well, I think that we have started dealing more with mental health issues after COVID and during COVID. The politicians have changed a bit the mentality, but still a lot has to be done. And also at European level, we see only some small steps in terms of coordinating these efforts.
Yeah, also because like economically as well, no, the mental health problems, like in the European Union just alone is around 600 billion euro lost in mental health problems, like people not going to job, also hospitalization and so on. So also this is not, I think there is not communicated enough, like how much it impacts the GDP as well.
I agree. There is a lack of understanding of the broader impact of mental health. There is a cultural issue on this that needs to be bridged. But things are moving, especially the younger generations are more sensitive to this, I would say, but we need to do more.
Yeah, and on social media, you think like also the impacts of social media on mental health, like what is your view? Because for example, we talk about Mamdani that use social media as a very powerful tool for a positive message, but can also have negative impacts on mental health. Like, in your view, like, what should be the social media usage in the EU among young people? There should be restriction and so on.
Yes. I think that it's good that we decide for an age limit to use of social media. It cannot be too high. Maybe it could be around 13 years old. We have been discussing this, and I am in favor of a limitation because it's clear that it's not providing for a better cognitive development. This is what we get also from scientists, and I think that we should be precautionary as we are in general as Europeans when we deal with this kind of uncertainty around possible damages. And I think we have been in fact for too much time leaving the social media environment without any restriction. So on one end now we have rules to fight the diffusion of violent content, of disinformation at extreme level. We have rules for that with the DSA, but also with the AI Act. We have rules to prevent the abuse of deepfakes for cyberbullying, for example, when we talk about mental health, but also crimes or mass disinformation. And we need to apply these rules. But also, I agree with the age limits for access to social media.
And because I think the social media, there are so many different aspects, right? So it can be impacts on mental health, but there can also be impacts on performance at school, skill level development, and so I think it's a really multifaceted kind of problem. But okay, let's leave that aside. I want to come back to something you said in the beginning about the negotiations leading up to the ESF Plus, right, to the European Social Fund, which is really an enormous fund. So tackling our whole range of issues between poverty, but also access to a workplace, equal conditions at the workplace, and so on. In your view, if you had to pick a choice, what do you think is the most pressing social emergency at the moment in Europe?
Well, I think that today the biggest emergency is the lack of access to basic services to large numbers of population. I give you one specific, the most important, I would say, example, which is the access to healthcare. We have seen this pillar of the European social model being eroded in many member states. Access to universal healthcare is not guaranteed anymore, with very long waiting lists for exams, increasing costs even for the public, even in the public context of public health services, and this has created the situation of a lot of people renouncing to cure themselves, which is something that is evidently a failure of the European model in this sense.
And I'm wondering, because of course, as a European politician, you must be exposed to all types of information flooding in all the time. So of all of these sources, how do you manage to form an opinion on topics, and especially how much do you manage to go on the ground and also hear from people themselves what they think?
Well, I try to stay informed, but I also try to select my sources and to have it. I have a team that can help me in getting the right informations that I need, and not be just, drowning in infinite flux of information. This can be applicable to general understanding of the news in the world, but also to more specific work of getting more in depth on specific topics for my work. You need to build some critical capacity yourself, but also it's good to have a team that can help you with that.
Yeah, and indeed you're lucky because you have a team that can help you with this information, but there are, for example, a lot of voters that do not have this possibility in changing, and what is the weight, for example, of this information on social media on the European Parliament as we have it today in terms of composition of seats between the right and the left? How much fake news?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of fake news being spread around through different means, through AI deepfakes, through traditional social media posts, through the spread of fake articles from unreliable platforms. So we see a different array of ways of bringing this information. And I think that today simply we should apply our rules, because we have a lot of rules to prevent these kind of abuses. Simply we see a lot of fake facts around the European Parliament in terms of negative information on how it works, on what it does. We need to use our means and also promote obviously a different communication.
And do you see some political forces that are clearly against this?
Yes, absolutely. There are political forces that base their electoral support by deceiving people.
Yeah, and here just to come back on real other problems, not real problems, like housing is also one of the basic facilities that is becoming more and more difficult. So for young people from 2015 to 2024, housing prices increased by 54% and rent prices by more than 20%. So this is way more than our salaries. And considering this issue and considering that in 2008 we had another financial crisis driven by the housing market, what do you think the left or the political party more focused on society and not leaving anyone behind did not understand about this issue?
Well, I think it was not put enough as a core priority, because things have gone a bit in the wrong way, in a way that has taken a lot of time for the political class to actually understand the scope of the problem, especially, for example, with the impact of short-term rentals on the cost of living and on the general rent market. And now the European Commission has promised to present a series of initiatives on the topic. And in fact, this builds on existing work. I give you an example. In the end of the previous mandate, I worked on the regulation for transparency in short-term rentals, so to oblige the platforms to share information with the local cities, with the mayors, with the regional governments, to give data that is needed to formulate policies that are effective on the impact on the rent costs. So we have worked in this direction, but now the European Commission has committed to more substantive work in terms of policies to support affordable housing. And for us as Socialists and Democrats, it will be a crucial litmus test for the work of the European Commission.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting, because I heard Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union address speaking about the housing problem, saying that prices have gone up 20%, but at the same time also speaking about that building permits have actually decreased. And of course, this is a framing very much in the direction to say the housing problem is addressed by building more. Do you agree with this, or do you think that the real problem lies somewhere else?
I think that in some places it's also a matter of building, but it's not the general approach that we can take if we want to be honest. So the problems is linked to the dynamic of the market, the distortions that happen, and also the behaviors of those that own the houses. And I think that it's totally correct from the political institutions to decide to act on these distortions to promote affordable housing for everyone.
I think I can also speak from a bit personal experience here. I come from South Tyrol, which is a extremely touristic region, with also now increasing short-term rents. And the housing prices there are incredibly high for such a small region, and so I think also people are getting more and more annoyed about these short-term housing schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it cannot be a taboo to limit that when necessary.
Yeah, and we just seen Lagarde in Florence as well to discuss not just housing but also food prices increases. But now that we are heading towards the end of the episode, our podcast is called Moving Europe, and our idea is to propose and to discuss with people that try to shape Europe for the better. And we asked the guests one specific question. So if you could do just one action for a fairer and more equal Europe, society-wise, what would you do?
I would say to you that the real first thing that I would do in this case, in this hypothesis, is in fact different from what we discussed until now.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, the basic problem around the impossibility to deliver in terms of the priorities we discussed today is the fragmentation of the European Union, because we have a complex decision-making system also linked to crucial topics on social agenda, on fiscal policies that are linked to a fragmentation of powers, of implementation that even is still there also when we use legislative instruments that should be more uniform, like regulations. And we have a common budget capacity that is limited. So we have on one end member states where you have right-wing policies being enacted by right-wing governments that are going in a wrong direction. But also we have a basic institutional problem by a European Union that is constructed in a way that is too weakly connected and too weakly united. I think that the issue of federal Europe is strongly connected to all the issues we have discussed, because the disincentives to do things together that we see that limit our actions in Europe could be less present with a more federal institutional framework.
Yeah, because we started the episode with the wealth tax, no? Like this is the perfect example.
This is exactly one topic where you could build more political support if it could be done at European level, because when you discuss this at national level, even some of the progressives say we are scared that in the context of a European Union, having this wealth tax only on our country would create just a flow of capital.
So more united Europe is the solution.
Yes, for a fairer and more social Europe, we need a federal, more united Europe.
Thanks a lot, Brando.
Brando.
Thanks.
Thank you.